the rituals happen. The Rosetta Stone was used in ritual with me. If you want a little brushstroke visual on that, think of like the Da Vinci Code scene with the sexual event on the rock. Okay, I just remember that and being off to the side in robes. So the memory is like a paper airplane in the dark. So when I get these bits back, the piece I got with tunnels from Smithsonian, I'm on a cart. It is yellow metal. It's like one of those little airport transport kind of carts, so it's open. There's no seatbelt for me. I'm probably drugged because when I get the memory back, that's what it feels like. I'm holding on to a little bar and I can see like chipped yellow paint in my hand, and then we're in, and then I just get F3 written in like military sort of stencil in yellow on the wall. And that, so yes, tunnels. But then years later, in my 20s, we went, I was dating this guy who had been a sniper in the Marine Corps, and I got this van and we're traveling around, and I'm like, we gotta go to DC. And so we go to DC, and I find this set of stairways right next to the Red Castle, the Smithsonian Red Castle. And I know that if we go down those stairs, this is the ticket. How did I know this? I don't know. I was there when I was 10. We go down these stairs. I go through the door like I'm nobody's business, and I, look like a crazy hippie like I do now. And next thing you know, we're walking down these underground passageways that lead to the Library of Congress. And we go through, and there's people with proper badges and the MAGA mask type outfit, right? I just call it that because it's a great term, but the Washington DC look, proper, and here we are, like, clearly not from around here, and we're walking down these hallways, and we show up and we're in the Library of Congress, and I'm like, how did I know that we would turn up in the Library of Congress? And then we walk out the front door of the Library of Congress and go about our business and try and find our way back to where we had parked the crazy purple painted with a roller hippie van parked on the street. And I'm like, how did I know? So yes, tunnels all the time. Always associated with trains or some kind of transport carts, and military stencil lettering on the wall, usually a letter and then a number signifier.
Hello, everybody. Good evening, and thank you, Charlie Robinson, for introducing me to Annalie. So Charlie has done a lot over the years on MKUltra and the Global Network, the Cabal, and he's a friend of the channel. Absolutely phenomenal research. He wrote the book, The Octopus of Global Control, and he interviewed Annalie, and it's absolutely fascinating. We have been communicating now for about half a year to arrange this. And we are going to get into Annalie's personal story. There are some traumatic moments, there are some hard-hitting moments, so viewer discretion advised. And because of the nature of this interview, Annalie, I have to ask you, do you give us permission to publish this, and do you waive your anonymity for us to do so?
Absolutely.
Okay, appreciate that. The word MKUltra, it's getting bandied about more, we do see on various platforms these days. I came across it, I think, reading a David Icke book 20 plus years ago. But for the new viewers who are not familiar with the terminology, are you okay to, how would you define MKUltra?
Well, yeah, I found the name in David Icke's work as well, and certainly had no idea what it was. But my life had a lot of bumps in the road. So I had put together long before that there was a manipulation going on in that. But for me, it's mind control, and it's manipulated mind control so that your own life force is being harnessed and used for other people's purposes and agendas. So for me, the MKUltra term, it's often funny for me now if I look at stuff and I see my name associated with that, because that was not part of the lexicon. But eugenics, transhumanism, and the forces of control have always been there as part of my life. One of my first words was chromosome. So, MKUltra has always been a hidden hand. And it's been a hidden hand in my life. And it's reassuring to me now to know that the not occult anymore. Occult just meaning hidden. And that people need to know that this happens. It's real people, it's ordinary people who have been on the fringes of extraordinary situations and been put in devastating circumstances and put through unimaginable trauma. And so that's what it could be. And then there's an opportunity to move out of that through healing and be a force of awakening in the world. And I think that's, where the activism piece that certainly you in your work has brought through, and with Charlie, and as well Richard Willett, who interviewed me for Iconic. So there's an opportunity to move forward, but it's about revealing this hidden hand that has controlled the minds and the agendas and the life force of humanity for far too long.
And you mentioned two key terms there: mind control and trauma. And it seems like extreme trauma is a fundamental part of the MKUltra program. Would you say that is correct?
Absolutely. Trauma-based mind control, and how that has been researched and understood, the ways the pleasure and pain principle can be inverted and reversed. And certainly now, since post-COVID world, we're seeing this rolled out on everyone. I would say really since about 2012, we were seeing it rolled out more and more. And so some of the programming things that I have endured, which, I'll try and broad brushstroke for survivors who might be listening to this, I'm not going to go into nitty gritty details. I want to preserve that for myself and also so people can listen, but without going into their own trauma states. But understanding the broad brushstrokes of things that were used on us in programs that were then rolled out into public sphere, and how, as a survivor, seeing that come out, it's really important to speak out about this, because these are things we know. And for those of us who are fairly far on in our healing, we've figured out how to deprogram from and see through the veil, see through, the Wizard of Oz programming and the man behind the curtain, and be able to walk into the real truth of what this is, and just seeing it as a manipulation, because that's all it is. So hopefully that answers that one.
Yeah, so thank you for getting the terminology out of the way. So let's go over your story now in the order everything happened, so the viewers can go on that journey with you. And my first question then will be, what are your earliest memories?
So, it's come forward in pieces. Some of my earliest memories are actually as a baby, and when those, and you're working through this. So I just want to say also, so I live with dissociative identity disorder. That's important for me to get out in the front. Okay, so MKUltra, there's all kinds of extreme abuse. And most of that results in people having something called complex PTSD. If you want to look up for some great definitions on that, I would recommend beautyafterbruises.com. But then if you've been very heavily worked and very manipulated into having a very organized, structured personality system, this is called dissociative identity disorder. In Europe, a lot of times it's called DIS, or dissociative identity syndrome. So it's not a mental illness, it's a mental injury. And it's an injury that is created through the trauma-based mind control. And in order to survive, you have to compartmentalize parts. So some of the first memories that I have are from being an infant. And when those come through, it's just raw emotion, right? So I got some of that back in, let's see, that was 2019. And it took about 4 months of just waking up in the middle of the night, much as an infant might do, crying for a parent that never comes. And then the ways in which some of that was manipulated. So, but the really concrete stuff that I got a lot of memories back from this. I've worked with these 3 parts, is from about age 4. And that was the first main split that they did. It's 3 parts. And I don't know if you've seen any of the stuff that was done with facial symmetry. That was a big thing in about 2012, people who were looking into the mind control, and particularly celebrities, where there's all kinds of photos of them available. And what you do is you split the face down the center, left and right. Okay, so parts of consciousness, parts of the brain, how the brain works on that. And then you match left to left and right to right. And then you have the regular, which is left and right together. And you can see that there are different personalities. So the first sets of those memories, there were three. They have names, they were assigned names. And then I through the course of healing, it's good to command your own sovereignty. So they exist, they're not going away, they're a part of me. So they have their own names that they've chosen for themselves. So I don't know if for people who are not listening to the audio who can see this is from my book, but so these are some photos. This is me at age 4, and that's the whole self, left and right together. Okay, this one is one of the fractures, and it dodged out there a minute. So that's right to right. Okay, and then this is, let's see, we get it there. That's left to left. Okay, so this is a male part. You can almost see slightly different, and then that's a female part, and then that's the integrated or more front altar. And so those first memories of how they would call you out using those names and what you were supposed to present with, and then so there's different programming, some of it was with owls, toy owls, and how you memorize things and how they can disappear and reappear. So all this is using organic things that are part of the child consciousness. But the thing with DID and why it's a mental injury and not an illness is that you are being traumatized so that you cannot have neurodevelopmental progression in an organic way. And so those milestones cannot be met because you have to hold this trauma in a place, because your caregivers are the ones who you need for food, shelter, comfort, and you can't completely reject that. So when they are the traumatizers, or they're putting you in the hands of those who are doing that, you have to compartmentalize that. But then this means that all of these wonderful things that happen with individuation and having your own soul purpose and your own self, you can't do that. So they talk about DID, they used to call it multiple personality. This is because there is a sense of it being a fractured self. And there are times when it's very staccato and you're only in one part and it doesn't have co-consciousness with the other. And so part of the healing process can be, it doesn't have to be this, but is learning how to work as a team and have co-consciousness. But it's very hard because, if my front part that's talking to you now has to constantly remember agonizing physical details from trauma as a child, it's pretty hard to just function on a day-to-day level. So that is held in a different thing. So it's really not fracturing. It's that you had to build these compartments to hold your own, temple of self up under terribly violent storms. So the earliest memories are about, the first one they fracture is always and then how you're supposed to hold that. So they would use a dollhouse. I was given a dollhouse. It's painted red. It's almost always red. They'll often do color associations with each of these. They can only make 8 compartments, but within those 8 compartments, you may have quite a few different parts. And those parts are, each time you are programmed, assaulted, run through training or whatever, those will separate in, and then they'll compartmentalize them. So for a baby in the crib, they'll put like a blanket sometimes, and then something happens or you're hit or whatever it is, and then you're given a toy, and then that toy is you're shown to put it in a compartment in like a pocket. Okay, so these are ordinary toys and ways that, but it's teaching you to segment and that. So some of the earliest memories, go into that, and then it's It's using food as abuse and withholding or rotten or things with that, and particularly toileting and whether or not you're allowed to go or when you're allowed to go or having to go on command, or using the excrement on your body and gross things like that. So broad brushstroke there with that. But those are the earliest memories. Those are the earliest fragments. And then, some of it when you get it. I mean, I kept remembering meeting Walter Cronkite at age 4 in a grocery store in New York City, where my parents were. And my mother they had just left McGill University, which is well known in the MKUltra stuff with you and Cameron. And then I'm there and was enrolled in the Horace Mann preschool. I keep bringing that up in these interviews, and no one's really biting on this. Okay, but this is one of these elite schools, and you have to interview to get in. Well, it was funded. The preschool division was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, and it was an early programming center using elite children for these projects. The larger school has graduated all these people who are now players in these big world forum type organizations, but they had a huge scandal, and the scandal never broke that it happened in the preschool. It absolutely happened in the preschool, very a la McMartin, taken to places like museums and that, and then these weird memories where you only get a little bit when you're 4, and they're coming from the eyes of a traumatized child or that. But I was meeting Walter Cronkite. I was being taken to hair salons where they're bragging about the Kennedys getting their hair cut there, and you have to sit in a little car. Well, by then JFK had been murdered in a car. Now at 4 you don't know that, but it's slowly building in these, I just call it like this, right? Like mirrored reflections, because you're never allowed to see yourself as who you truly are. You can only see yourself in this dizzying narcissistic mirror, right? The myth of Narcissus is beautiful here, because this is someone who is so in love with themselves that they want to see themselves in the mirror. Well, it's not that the child is in love with themselves. You hate yourself, and you're taught to the earliest age. I mean, one of my first attempts was age 4, and I have a up the road scar on my wrist, and oh, mommy, how did that happen? Years later, oh, well, that was your tea set, right? A 4-year-old. So those are the early memories. This is how it builds. And then for me, it continued on, different phases, worked at different levels, but really into my early 20s was when I finally got fully free. I started to fight it like hell when I was 14.
Okay, before we get there, Annalie, could you just explain who your parents were, and do you know how they met?
Yes, so they met at the Galton Laboratory for Eugenics, and it was called that at the time. It's a genetics, and that term is what's understood now, but it is eugenics. It never dropped that name, and that's important for me to get people to understand. So this is eugenics, and then into transhumanism agenda, and they were both graduate students. My mother had already gotten her MD from the University of Pretoria in South Africa, where she grew up and endured her own forms of mind control and certainly medical testing in that because of the rare blood disorder. And then my father was there. He had been in Canada. He had been at McGill and then went to the Galton. And they met there while my mother was doing her PhD, where her project was to clone the rare blood disorder that we both share and that her mother shared. And she had a sister who was murdered by the doctors who also shared that. And they met there. And then basically my father kind of manipulated her and was sort of stalking her. And she was like, no, no, no. And this is when Harry Harris was the director of the Galton. And then Harry moved to University of Pennsylvania to take the eugenics agenda, and where the cult wanted that to go to the US, to the University of Pennsylvania. And so my mother then went for a postdoc in Montreal at McGill. And then from there, they were there for some years before they got married, and then she became pregnant with me, was there during the pregnancy, and then we moved to New York, and I was born at the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. So then she's at Mount Sinai. She was working in pediatric genetics, studying children and genetics. And my father was at the Sloan Kettering Cancer Center doing cancer genetics. And the programming, it begins before birth, and it begins in the womb. And they don't let you go until you fight your way out.
I hope you're enjoying the podcast. It's with my sponsor, Shopify. When I started this podcast, there were a lot of things I had to figure out on my own. Algorithms, guest booking, marketing. I was a bit naive about what was involved, and as you get deeper into it, it starts to overwhelm your life. Finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started, such as my co-host Ron's Pokemon business. Get started with your own design studio of hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.co.uk/Shaun, SHAUN. Go to shopify.co.uk/Shaun, shopify.co.uk/Shaun. Link in the description if you're watching on YouTube. Thanks for supporting our sponsor. Back to the podcast. Why do you think your parents put you forward for this programming?
So we have a history of multi-generational trauma, which is what they're looking for. And if you look at some of Kathy O'Brien's work with her work with Mark Sullivan, he was talking about, or Mark Phillips, sorry. He was talking about how it really only takes 3 generations of serious trauma to have these pathways of being able to dissociate quickly, easily, and compartmentalize. So your brain needs to work like an archival mind, and it has to be very organized, because you can't make mistakes, because that's dangerous for the perpetrators. So they both have backgrounds of multi-generational trauma. My mother with her upbringing in South Africa during apartheid, and then the medical trauma. She was held in institutions till she was 6 and experimented on. And then my father grew up in a very abusive household, and his father was in the Battle of Vimy and a lot of war trauma. And then that person took it out on his children and was so that's who they're looking for, because that's going to be a really good candidate for the mind control. They've already got 2 generations in the blood, so then you get the third. And if you get them early enough, this is the Freemason phrase, give me a child before 8 and I'll give you the man of the world, or whatever their phrase is. But the earlier they can get them. So this was why. And then in terms of why they would want that for a child, one, with my mother, I just don't think that she has recovered from her programming. I mean, I really think she is herself dissociative. My father certainly as well. And they sell it as a beautiful thing, and she desperately wanted a career to be someone in the world. And she is a world famous eugenics researcher. She is an MD, PhD, and she consults for NIH. She's on grant review boards deciding who gets money for funding and who doesn't. She's, worked all over the world in all these gene mapping conferences and that. She wanted that. And so how do you get your title if you're no one? You have to pony up, right? And so these families are targeted for that, and benefits are given. Now, does she think of it like this? I don't think so. I mean, I really think she just, there's so much disconnect and there's so many lies, and they absolutely cannot understand what it is they've done. But I mean, I haven't had any contact with her for years. I do still look at what her research is going, and those pathways are um, because she's still hurting kids. The bottom line is she still has access to thousands of patients all over the world and is driving research and funding for research that is impacting children. She founded the genetic counseling division at UC Irvine. So if you want to look at eugenics, they can't. Eugenic counseling is like a great example of this slippery slope of like, oh, well, they're an authority and they'll, yeah, these are just people who are convincing you to like murder your kid or not have a kid because they don't want you to, you know, they don't want you to live. They don't want you to live. That's the bottom line. So why did they choose this life? I have no idea, but I think fame and opportunity, um, and then the notoriety of getting to have a kid. But I mean, then they got into it and realized that, I remember at one point I have two children of my own, and she said to me, "Oh my lord, can you imagine having to work with two?" Okay, so you could think of it as a woman, single mother at this point, because they divorced when I was 9, but having to work with two children, certainly. But the way, I mean, this is where the archival mind and being very highly attuned to emotions and being very perceptive with human behavior, and that is absolutely how you have to survive like this as an MK. Um, she meant having to work two subjects. So I was always referred to as Miss Mouse. So she used mice in her genetics experiments, and of course all the mice get cold, so there's this threat always. And yeah, I was called the control sample when she would sample me in our house when I was like 8. This began in Tustin, California, and she's at the University of California, Irvine. And she needs to run off on Saturday morning to run some experiments in the lab when no one is there. Why does no one have to be there? Or do you just want to get away from your family? I don't know. But, I'm asleep in my bed and she'll pull my arm out and take blood samples. So very simple, but it's that attacking. And when you've already been coded with this, it's in your own home. You need this person for food and shelter, and it's absolute garbage to them. They need a blood sample to run as a control with this other stuff. And oh look, there's a piece of meat in the bed, like, take the blood. So it's not, and these are people who have huge amount of control in the present day, making decisions about children, who's coaching people on whether or not to have children, who's going to get funding, and it goes completely unchecked. And whistleblowers, I have a case with this. They don't. We get no voice in this. We can try, but it's very hard because these people are wired into this mindset of total narcissistic sociopathy that is accepted across the board as normal behavior.
Going back to your story, Annalie, so as you were beginning to learn language as a child, how was it being explained to you what was happening? I imagine because that's all you knew, you thought it was normal?
That's a difficult one. I mean, it's just interwoven in the way you live your life, and it's built in as play. So, for example, my mother would go away to a conference or be at work, and I had a nanny and I was in preschool and this. But, if my father, who was the primary caregiver at this time, he would play these games. So from age 4, we would play hide and seek, normal game to play with a child, okay? But then he would leave a suitcase out, and I had to, go hide in the suitcase is a perfect thing, and then it was all built on this training of being able to ride in a suitcase without screaming, with it closed so that they can get you into other locations unseen, unheard. You won't scream, and you'll get out and you'll do whatever they tell you when you get to the other side. Okay. So I don't know all of those parts. I can get to some of it. And with for other survivors doing the memory work, I would encourage you to hold your window of tolerance for what you're willing to look at and when you need to look at it. And if you need to look at it very closely and be very aware of what needs to be worked, because you don't need to know all of it. But you need to get to where you convince yourself that this is real, because I mean, it absolutely wasn't real for me until, I mean, and even it gets more real all the time. But I mean, I did not know that this was not normal, and I did not know that this was happening to me in this way. So there's the riding in suitcases, and why do we have to do this? Why am I taken to my first passport photos of me? And you know, now they only let you have your head in it, but back then it was sort of spaced back, and I was holding a Mickey Mouse marionette. So marionette, strings pulling, but the Mickey Mouse is a coding term. And my first trip internationally to be internationally or taken to these things, I don't really know all of what was used for. Some of it was truly just medical, or running sort of these like mind games and tests, right? It's not all child, and some of that I just don't get into very much, and I don't think it's as relevant, because people need to understand that children are being used in many more ways than just, okay, they're being used to assess information and stuff like that. So I was taken to Basel, Switzerland. The International Society for Human Gene Mapping was held there. That would have been 1980, and have to have the passport photo identifying me. And then she goes, we were mostly staying in Basel, but she goes someplace, and of course Switzerland is a big mind control programming center. There's a big, you know, if you want to use Illuminati or whatever these terms are, I think they're kind of ridiculous and erroneous, but the groups, you know, the controlled, organized crime groups, have big centers, certainly financial centers in Switzerland, but also medical stuff. And I'm taken there, and then my father is taking me during the day to go see castles. So these big, elite, buildings with ancient history and ancient ritual history, now being run as like tourist things. So just to give people a little visual, think of the stupid Twilight movies and how the Volturi have this little, you know, people can come through and look at it and oh, it's this castle and and then go on the tour, right? And then, you know, right? Okay, so who gets taken out on that? But it's a part tourist destination, really good for money flow and all that, right? So we're going to these castles. I'm age 4, and I split my head. I actually have quite a pronounced scar, and I get taken to some kind of hospital, and they have to stitch it up. But so this is the story, right? This is the narrative that you get told of that. And I do sort of remember some of that, but I remember a bunch of other stuff. I wrote this out when I had my blog in 2012. And so that, if you look at Prince William, he has a similar scar. Okay. I think they call this the mark of the lamb in some of the ritual stuff. But things were done on that trip. Okay. So I'm losing my train of thought here with this, but the snippets that come in, you're going to get just little broken bits, and having to put it together, it's taken me, you know, really since 2011, heavy memory work. Understanding where the pieces fit and having a huge tolerance for not understanding how it goes together and how it has context with this other larger global picture that's happening. It takes a really long time and a lot of patience, and a lot of times you just have to go inward and say, okay, I'm just going to be in joy and do things that are fun and try and be fully present. And then you choose your times to do the memory work carefully and with good support if possible, because it's hard. It's, I mean, since we spoke, you know, and the interviews with Charlie and Richard, this whole other arena opened up, and I was having to get through programming that I was emotional flooding, and I basically relived huge sections of physical trauma for 3 months at a time, these last 3 months, and it was excruciating. And the level of work I had to do to be able to be here today speaking to you, it's like I just had to say, okay, step back. I'm of no use to the effort to protect children who are being harmed now, or activism, if I can't hold center. So just to other survivors who are hearing this and being like, wow, how'd you get to here? It's like, it's not easy. So take your time and be patient with yourself. And be willing to not know how the pieces fit together for a very long time.
So, as a child, then, how often were you transported to outside locations for mind control purposes?
Um, so I'm going to go forward a little bit in time, just because that's a little bit easier to work with, and the memories are a bit more tangible. So from about the age of 8 until 12 or 13, I was taken all over the world. Some of these were for personal family trips. At one point in 1984, we went to South Africa to meet family for the first time, and that it was during the year that Zola Budd tripped Mary Decker in the Olympics. So the Olympics figure in with this, but we're there, and basically that was where the ritual abuse aspect came in. And I was the culmination of that was um, being forced to watch a ritual murder of a woman, and then trying to leave the country to get back to California. Our plane stopped in Kenya for a transfer, and there was a bomb scare on it 3 times in a row. They kept calling it in. And so they kept doing things to manipulate during that. So at one point, you had to leave everything on, and you were running down the runway and turning around expecting to see the plane explode. That doesn't happen. And then all our baggage gets sent out, and all of it comes out except for I had this one doll. It was a Fisher Price Mandy doll in a blue dress with white polka dots and a red hat, red shoes. Okay, so these are again color things. And the very last thing to come around the turnstile was my doll. So these are the ways in which they twist things, and seeing the teddy bear of some other child cut open. These are very common uses in programming. So that I'm taken to conferences all over the world and left in hotel rooms, to Japan in 1986 after my grandmother had died, and like hours and hours and hours in these hotel rooms where I don't have any access to someone, or I don't speak the language, but there's the mini bar, right? And so that's when you get into the addiction links, that because the trauma, it goes very well with the addiction, right? And using that to mask, and how they, but you're not supposed to do that, so you drink it all and you fill it with water at the tap and you screw the thing, and all these clever little ways a child mind works to try and figure your way out of the rat cage that you're being put in.
Annalie, can I just go back to the ritual? Do you remember like what people were wearing, what it looked like inside, any symbology, what people were saying, chanting, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I'm going to go a little bit faster here. Just that's how I'm going to get through it. Okay, so it starts with I have to be left at some location early in the morning, no water, no hat, and we're going to go on an ox cart ride. There is another girl there who is my mother's friend in South Africa, and that's her daughter. And we are led by the Maasai in red on an ox cart ride through the South African savannah, thinking that if you try and run away, you're going to get eaten by a lion, as an 8-year-old from Southern California. It's a pretty good wall of security that you're going to stay on an ox cart ride. So no water, no food, parched throat, heat stroke, get to the fair, which I don't know who this group was, and mother's not there to meet me, but of course I want her, and then having to run through the fair, and at one point a turkey chases us, and then these whole bulls. So the bull symbolism and stripped of skin. So skinned bulls being roasted on a spit, and the smoke and the smell. So smoke, smell. They get into you with a lot of sensory stuff, parched, and then this huge buffet of like all the most wonderful food you could imagine. But I can't eat it because my throat has swollen shut because I haven't had. So this is the wear down, overwhelm, and then you just, and mother's not going to comfort. I'm in a foreign country. I don't know who any of these people are. And then I was basically flopped. So I want to go over this. Fight, right? But as a child, you're not going to win. So you quickly give up on that. Flight. So this is the dissociation piece because you're not really going to be able to run away. But then there's three others. Freeze, right? But that's temporary. That's where you're going to try and figure out which one's going to work. Flop. This is when it's totally overwhelming to the neurosystem. This is the polyvagal theory. I highly recommend people look at a site called dis-sos.com. It's written for people with DID, and she goes over the polyvagal theory and how this is neurodevelopmentally, how this is being done, and why biologically it's so hard to come out of, right? But so flop, this is when the body anesthetizes itself because you're preparing for death, and it's going to make it an easy death for you, and your breathing rate slows, your heart rate slows. So this is where some of the things like Kathy O'Brien talked about her daughter having this respiratory drive problem when she broke free and was getting away. So the respiratory drive is hugely utilized because it's going to change brain chemistry and all this, but it's also part of this polyvagal theory in the flop state. The other one is called fawn. So flight, fight, freeze, flop, and fawn. Fawn is the worst, and it's what's happening all over the world with everyone who is being trauma-based mind controlled by the media. And this is where you're like, oh, it's Stockholm syndrome. Okay, this is the easiest way to describe it. And where you're going to try and be the most perfect little person so that they love you and abuse stops. So at that ritual, I mean, the bull, but then I get taken to a car and put in a car, and all of the other stuff gone. I have no memory of it. What I got back was in 2013, after I had already gone public, and I was working with a group of other survivors, people who know Duncan and Miranda and the super soldier stuff, Sarah Stanga in the UK and her work with Miles Johnston, Randy Moggins, Dave Corso. This was the group that I was working with, and we were targeted by a group called the Temple of Set, and I was targeted later by a faction of that called the Gray Faction, and I was picked up again. So, but the ritual stuff completely gone. But in 2013, I got this piece back where I saw the murder. I saw what happened, and it was grisly. So this is where it's really hard in understanding how to believe yourself and having the traction to believe it, because it's like, well, you're missing the crux, right? But you're not. You are that. And so to survivors who are having a hard time putting together what you may have lived through or this, but I mean, the symbolism of the teddy bear being ripped, okay, some of this, but in terms of like am I going to tell you I saw a Masonic symbol or like the Illuminati? No, like gone. All you remember is the trauma. And then I can get context because that's where there would be like what they call bleed throughs or avataring, where more front person parts of my personality who had to figure out how to navigate an airport or interface with other adult passengers who were all standing around the baggage claim waiting for baggage. That has to be a front part who can hold social normal. But still you're running, I saw the teddy bear split open, I saw the woman murdered. So it's teaching you how to be an incredible actor and hold different parts, but it's not acting. It is very real, and it's about how developmentally you've been forced to compartmentalize in order to survive the trauma, just to be able to, all I wanted to do at that point was get back to California. And believe me, California was a hellhole in 1984 in terms of my life and what I was living through there. So I'm sorry I can't give you more on the ritual and who was involved. I don't know. I have no idea of who they were. But apartheid
Okay.
was in full swing.
As all this is going on, then are you, like I said, you said earlier, this is the normal to you. But is there a point where you're realizing, perhaps? I mean, did you have friends your age, and you started to compare yourself to other people?
I was always told, oh, we're different than other people and we're not like that. So, but very, you'll hear my accent change a little bit. Part of that is that I have a part, it's the internal critic, and it mimics her voice. So she's from South Africa and then spent a lot of time in England. So she has accent. So I'm not doing it to be rude with the across the pond thing. It's this part that's coded to speak like that. So, you're different. And with school, I'm in school, I have friends, but I constantly get taken out of school to go to these conferences around the world. Or there was a time period in about 1988-89 where she was doing a blood study in Utah. So this might be of interest because it relates to the ritual stuff and the spiritual stuff, but also the academic medical. And she was doing studies on the Mormon population in Utah. Okay, so this is multi-generational trauma, well known for their polygamy, well known for their interest in that. And she was studying a genetic disorder that basically comes from the and that results in mental retardation and developmental delay. And I'm taken with her, and I have to either stay in the hotel room or help her navigate, because she's a very frightened, frigid, strange woman, tiny. I mean, I'm like 5'9" and she's 5'4", and I got big quite quickly. So, I was like her bodyguard, but I'm a kid, it was ridiculous. And if she would go, we once went to a state mental facility back when they had these, and there was a very severely mentally retarded boy there who she needed a blood sample from, and I had to wait in the car. So hot car, and then all of the car wreck programming. I'm just going to tangentially reference that, but you're stuck in the car, and she has to go in, get this blood. And so apparently this boy didn't want it done and fought, and he was large, and they had to get all these people to like dogpile him and hold him down to draw it. So then she gets back to the car and she's in tears, and I'm like, I've been in the hot car, I'm hungry, I'm scared, what the hell just happened, what's going to happen next? And I have to comfort her because it was so dramatic to have to take this blood from this young boy. So this is the narcissist, of like, oh, poor me. When the orange one was like, I too am a victim of all this, before this lesson. They love to call themselves the victim in this. They're just piece of work. Anyway, so yes, I had other friends, but there was always this other part that had to be completely encapsulated. And where were you? Oh, I was doing stuff, I don't get to say what it was. And with that whole blood study in Utah, I mean, we're taken to these big events. It's usually at holidays when all the family would get together anyway. So Christmas, Easter, all this. So all those holidays are now bad anniversaries for me because it was always shitty. And at that point, I want to bring this up as well because of another survivor who's being very brave. And I haven't looked too much at her stuff, but I just want to sort of send this out to her. And that is Juliet Bryan, who was held at Zorro Ranch. So at one point during that Mormon blood study, where she's doing the eugenics genetics research on a known multi-generational trauma that results in genetic mutations, we go to Los Alamos National Labs, to the eugenics laboratories at Los Alamos. in 1988. So why are they doing eugenics, genetics in Los Alamos? Okay, this is a place that's developing weapons for the military under secret programs, and that never ended. So why are we doing this stuff on multi-generational trauma, genetic mutations there? So we always go on a Saturday because there's not that many people there, and I am held in locked confinement. So the piece I get back is I flop. I go to sleep. But going to sleep is something different because they would train that into you with drugs. And so there was the lab portion that I struggle to get some of this fully forward, but basically you're drugged and then you have to do stuff and you're slept. So a lot of this is done in the lab, but the pieces that I have that are rock solid that I can communicate to the public right now are the pieces where it was being worked in a situation that was partly public, so I am in this laboratory building behind razor wire fence in Los Alamos. I'm held in some guy's office. I flop. I mean, why didn't I destroy the office? These are the things you tell yourself years later working. Why didn't I wreck his office? And because it's not going to do a damn bit of good, you know. So and then you're not allowed to toilet. So I move the wastebasket liner aside and leave a big turd in the toilet in the trash can under his desk and then put the bag back so no one sees, right? You're going to smell it, but you'll find that on Tuesday when it's back in business, right? So then, something happened there. I don't know. I was blacked out. I remember them opening the door and just jumping up all of a sudden. And then the real programming often for me happened in museums. And I don't know why they used museums. But I mean, this is museums all over the world, British Museum, the stuff with mummies, stuff with the Rosetta Stone. You get taken twice. Once you're given the map, you know where everything is. You map it out in your mind. And then the second time you come back and you're switched and you come at night and the rituals happen. The Rosetta Stone was used in ritual with me. If you want a little brushstroke visual on that, think of like the Da Vinci Code scene with the sexual event on the rock. Okay, I just remember that and being off to the side in robes. So but the real programming at the Los Alamos part happened in the museum. And so when I worked that through, but this is where it's so hard because I would love to be able to talk to Juliet and I would love to be able to intersect memories, but it's so hard because I need to keep integrity with I'm so suggestible and it's such a part of who I am that I don't want to hear something that she has to say and then think it's mine and take it as my own. And so this is why I keep myself in a very sort of hermit-like existence out in the Dagobah system where I live. This is my joke, where Yoda holes up, right? When the Jedis are all being hunted down, because I want to keep that integrity. But absolutely, the eugenicists are using trauma-based mind control, multi-generational trauma, the New Mexico piece, and what the hell happened in Los Alamos and why I was taken there at age 12 and have memories. In Zorro Ranch, from what I understand, there are probably underground trains that run across to where the dull space is. And then years later, roaming around trying to put my memory back. This is one, they say return to the scene of the crime, right? This is like the criminal will go back to where it happened. Well, this happened throughout my life where I would go back in my 20s and 30s and I would go back to these places where things had happened as a kid and I'm trying to put it together and trying to grasping, and I spent a lot of time wandering around the dull space area and, like, oh my God, I got to pull over here and drive down some dirt road. And I'm just going to like stop and make a grilled cheese sandwich on my camp stove. And then I realized that there are ventilation stacks all over the ground in the middle of nowhere in the desert. And I'm like, oh my God, this goes to something. And why did I know that I needed to come exactly here? And why am I here? And how long have I been here? Oh my God, I've been here 3 hours. I just made a grilled cheese sandwich. No, why am I here 3 hours? So this is very hard. Where was I just spaced out in the car? Did I get taken through some vent? Gentlemen, have a Pepsi, and spies like us, and you go down some weird elevator. I don't know. I mean, it's pretty horrible to have to try and sort this through, and then also have this passion for wanting to be like, this is happening, people, and it's happening now, and it's happening to kids. And if you don't wake up on a global scale, it's gonna eventually come knocking at your door. And I can guarantee you it's really unfun to have to try and sort this out and want help and want to have this community of activists who are bravely, under great duress, trying to speak out like Juliet. And it's the nature of being a survivor of these organized crime groups and MKUltra and living with DID is that you simply have to get to where you understand that there are boundaries and limitations of your experience that you must respect. And it can only go so fast, even as the world is tumbling out of control.
So oddly enough, I interviewed Juliet 2 days ago. I've known her for years,
Oh,
and yeah, she's a fantastic spiritual warrior. So viewers, check that one out as well. And I've got a few questions have come up to mind from what you just said then. So, during these days of being transported places, did you ever end up in any tunnels?
yeah. Yeah, tunnels. Lot of tunnel stuff comes up. So at the age of 10, after the divorce, when we left California, we lived in Bethesda, Maryland, and my mother was working at the National Institutes of Health in Washington, D.C. So now, of course, all transportation there is in the tube, the London term, but in the metro there. And so there were always that. So the way they do this is they layer it in. And it's very effective because there's all these normal things that you would be riding the subway in. Okay, but there's lots of other tunnel stuff. And when I interviewed with Charlie in October of last year, I mentioned to him that the NIA, or that the Smithsonian, and that I had a part come out fairly recently, and it said they put the ghosts in there. And so then I've been working that piece and trying to understand that. And the tunnels under Washington, D.C. figure in very prominently. So most of my memories with the Smithsonian and being used there, they happen during the day. The public is there. Those are like the proving grounds, kind of, to see if you can work something and puzzle it out, and, while it's a live situation. But the question, I had the opportunity to speak to someone who's an expert in DID and is one of the few therapists who understands the organized crime aspect and the larger global socio-political scheme of what's going on. And when I spoke to him last year, just as a consult, he's not my therapist and he's retired now anyway. It was right before he was about to retire. He said to me, do you have any military training? So the tunnel parts show up, and also we talked about the ghosts, and ghosts are part. I said to Charlie, oh, they put the ghosts in there. They make me hold the things to let the ghosts out. And I thought, oh, this is some weird esoteric, like, oh, I'm gonna hold this and then the jinn is gonna. No. This is an internal programming thing, and the ghosts are the ones who absolutely can't come out. And you often think you're dead because they will have done things to torture you to make you think you're dead. Whether it's with drugs or, in coffins, things like that. But the tunnels show up hugely in the Smithsonian stuff. Okay. So, there, and then, the other place the tunnels show up, it's always with trains. And I've taken a lot of train journeys in my life, but there's all this stuff with trains and just being terrified of the dark and like the light bands. So all I get is just because I was probably drugged, switched, and so getting to that, a very important rule for people living with DID is you should never ever go part hunting. Don't hunt yourself. You've already been hunted enough. So this means that when you get a memory back, don't understand it as just a memory. Understand it that there is a part of you that is extremely traumatized that is holding that, and they want you to hold their hand. They want you to pull them out of being in the flashback and being stuck thinking it's still happening as present tense, and they want you to pull them forward so they can go on living and have a life again. So the memory is like a paper airplane in the dark. So when I get these bits back, the piece I got with tunnels from Smithsonian, I'm on a cart. It is yellow metal. It's like one of those little airport transport kind of carts, so it's open. There's no seatbelt for me. I'm probably drugged because when I get the memory back, that's what it feels like. I'm holding on to a little bar and I can see like chipped yellow paint in my hand, and then we're in, and then I just get F3 written in like military sort of stencil in yellow on the wall. And so yes, tunnels. But then years later, in my 20s, we went. I was dating this guy who had been a sniper in the Marine Corps, and I got this van, and we're traveling around, and I'm like, we got to go to DC. And so we go to DC, and I find the set of stairways right next to the Red Castle, the Smithsonian Red Castle. And I know that if we go down those stairs, this is the ticket. How did I know this? I don't know. I was there when I was 10. We go down these stairs. I go through the door like I'm nobody's business, and I, look like a crazy hippie like I do now. And next thing you know, we're walking down these underground passageways that lead to the Library of Congress. And we go through, and there's people with proper badges and the MAGA mask type outfit, right? I just call it that because it's a great term. But the Washington D.C. look, proper, and here we are, like clearly not from around here, and we're walking down these hallways, and we show up, and we're in the Library of Congress, and I'm like, how did I know that we would turn up in the Library of Congress? And then we walk out the front door of the Library of Congress and go about our business and try and find our way back to where we had parked the crazy purple painted with a roller hippie van parked on the street. And I'm like, how did I know? So yes, tunnels all the time. Always associated with trains or some kind of transport carts, and military stencil lettering on the wall, usually a letter and then a number signifier.
So having gone through mind control, and then you start dating as a teenager, how does that work? Does it get in the way?
Yeah, to say the least. So my first boyfriend was when I was 18, and I was, regularly dissociating when we would, try and make out or whatever, and that had to be worked through. But the problem was I was also still pretty fresh out of having just been worked at age like 14 or so in England. We went to the Galton Laboratory, one of the last times we went there. And I'm going to throw this in there because it segues a little bit with what Richard interviewed Juliet with recently, and some of the pieces that he's doing that I think is relevant. So we go to England at age 14, and I had been at that point already in the mental health system. I had been held for 3 weeks, and then I have to go to group therapy, individual therapy, and therapy with my mother. So 3 times a week. And the group therapy group is with all these other kids that are troubled, and ended up being date at a party that they had. So that's pretty hard because now that's front part, and the sexual trauma happens with that. So then you were suddenly blowing out systems. But you know what? Here's the gift. That's the traction point where I was like, wait a minute. Why is this shockingly familiar? So then, oh, we have to go to England. So we go to England. My mother doesn't know that this has happened, but she drove me to the party and picked me up the next day, So we go to England, and stuff happens at the Galton. I have to meet this woman named Una with a very specific type of eyeliner it looks like kind of maybe a harlequin mask. Okay, so she was a trainer. She is a lab tech at the Galton, and I have to hang out with her it's mostly just a lot of boring stuff of hanging out in the lab while my mother does whatever the eugenics stuff. But this person was also a trainer on some other level. And then my mother just ends up having to go to Oxford for a while, and I have to stay in the house with the then director of the Galton, who was David Hopkinson, Hoppy Hopkinson. So the Galton is taken apart now. This was Darwin's old laboratory. It's associated with the Huxley brothers. Richard and I talked a lot about this in the X Club, and so I have to stay at his house, and sometimes his partner takes me to go do fun things, like, oh, we go to Kenny High Street and go shopping at all the crazy hippie shops, and I get awesome bootleg Jimi Hendrix CDs I could never get in the States. But then there's weird, because we go to Hampstead Heath, and there's stuff where I'm in the big estate house that's kept as a tourist destination. You can go through there, and I'm sort of channeling some kind of ghost thing happening. But then did we go back a second time? I don't know. And then we go to Highgate Cemetery, and I have to be taken to Karl Marx's grave there. I just wanted to go and draw the art you see behind me. It's all my art. So I wanted to sketch the angels covered with the ivy, because that was so symbolic and so very much how I felt at that time in my life. This like frozen stone angel just trying to freeze and just hold poise through this unimaginable, grotesqueness of my life at the time. So there's, trying to hang out with kids my age, but then it goes bad, and I can't really discern, with the date. I could have got up and walked away. I absolutely could have gotten up and walked away, and I remember being frozen and staying. And then why? Or, in ninth grade, I was attacked in a swimming pool during a PE class right in front of the teacher, pulled down, and the boys get under my swimsuit and whatnot. I completely dissociated that. Zero, none of it. Only remembered it 4 months later, when I was finally in the institution that my mother worked for in the adolescent psychiatry, where I met the psychiatrist who then managed my case for a number of years. And he's the only physician who was given FDA approval to use MDMA on children as a therapy, including adolescents, including myself. And that was when I got heavily into the LSD stuff. And the LSD stuff carried on for years through into my college years. Met someone when I was at UC San Diego trying to pursue a degree in philosophy and better myself and maybe find a way out of the mess. And then I end up, having to meet this guy, and he's in the Navy. And next thing you know, there's LSD being taken directly onto Navy bases. And I don't really remember a whole lot of it. I just remember, like, how did I even end up with this? It's not like I made any money on this. It was just like, it came out of the labs at UCSD. It's going to naval bases in San Diego, directly onto the ship during a intruder alert thing. And I show up, and just weird shit. Like, how do I even remember this? How do I even, and none of it makes sense, So yeah, it's pretty hard to date, and it's pretty hard to be married. I've been married almost 20 years now, and I have a wonderful partner who's seen the most unbelievably weird shit, because there's times when in 2020 I was getting parts back that were so encapsulated, I had no idea who my kids were. They would come up to me, and I would be crying, and I'd be on the floor when the moment before I had been making dinner. And then I'm on the floor, and I'm holding a knife, and I'm backed into a corner, and I'm terrified. And they're like, "Mommy," and I have no idea who they are. I have no idea where the fuck I am, what year it is. And, teaching my husband how to talk me to the present. Like it's like throwing a fishing line and pulling me out of the darkest place you can imagine. So yeah, it's
How
pretty
long
tricky.
how long did the mind control experiments last for, and how did you get out of them?
So maybe the experiments ended probably when I left UC Irvine, which is where I think a lot of the labs were. Um, the other piece that fairly recently understanding is that, so a little background, UC Irvine is in Irvine, it's in Orange County, it's near the El Toro Marine Base, which is where Lee Harvey Oswald was given sniper training. It's pretty well understood in our type of community that Lee Harvey Oswald was probably MK. And there were these times when I would drive around and in my 20s, and I was on trying to find the entrance through a gate at the El Toro Marine Base that I don't know. And years later, I went to I've always found nature very healing. So I became a park ranger. My first day of academy was 9/11. Bad
Mm.
choice. And so crazy hippie chick out there, and there's this guy in North Carolina. He's going to teach us how to shoot a shotgun. Have I ever shot a shotgun in my life? Never touched one. Don't want anything to do with guns. And he's like, okay, you're perfect. Come here. And he's going to throw 3 clay pigeons up in the air, and I have to shoot them. And he's like, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. You'll be fine. So I go through, well, bam, 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 explode. Like, not just chip off the side, center shot, explode the clay pigeon. And they're like, wow, Annalie Oakley, okay. And it wasn't until so I've always known that piece. And I've known the piece of like wandering around in a daze around the El Toro Marine Base for trying to find my way in. And, other stuff. It wasn't until last year talking to Brian Moss when he's like, do you ever have any military training? I was like, no. I was like, oh shit. So when did the mind control end? Probably the experiments or the training or whatever that probably when I graduated high school. But then I was left. I tried to get away. I went to New Hampshire, and then I was kind of called back, and I ended up in San Diego, again, another place where a lot of this is done. And in my college experience there was worked. I was in a job as a caterer, and we were taken to Arthur Laffer's house. It was during the Republican convention. There was probably some kind of ritual that happened there. He had a 6-foot monitor lizard. There was all kind of, we went there multiple times. All these famous names. Katie Couric was there. Rush Limbaugh was on the guest list. Dan Quayle was the man of honor for that. It's at Arthur Laffer's house. He's the inventor of Reaganomics. And that location, his house, the Eyrie, was about 2 miles away from where the Heaven's Gate house was. And that incident where they all offed themselves because of the UFO coming happened 2 weeks separate from when I was there on this event with Dan Quayle. So the ritual stuff and how they're pulling this and who's associated, I don't know. I'm going to throw out a ton of names because I want people to understand that all of this is interlocked. The medical academic, these big names in medical research, the CART School for Autism happening out of UCI, and why they're talking to the Nobel scientists, and the ozone stuff, and the Galton lab, and the and then these other political names. It's all interfaced, and people think that it's compartmentalized and no one knows. Yes, to some degree it is, but there's some people who know, and there's some people like myself who have been a ghost in the machine, if you will, and having to intersect with all this stuff that's just completely dizzying. Why was I meeting Walter Cronkite? Why was I meeting Bob Hope in England? Why was I meeting Arthur Laffer in my 20s? So the mind control ended then, I think, but then I, get away and do some other stuff, and I'm wandering around in the, backcountry as a wilderness guide and just trying to stay off the grid as much as possible. I lived in my van a lot or out of a backpack on the trail in remote wilderness. And then I end up going into the Park Service, and so then I become a federal law enforcement officer for the National Park Service, which as a park ranger. And just when you think you've got away, sometimes they'll let you go for a while, and you'll be able to do some things and maybe mature a little. And then all of a sudden, you have no money, and you're kind of sick of living in a van down by the river, and these opportunities open up, and you'd be so great on the SAR team in the winter. Your ski skills are so awesome, and they make you feel great, and have this ego boost when you felt like a piece of shit your whole life, and then, oh, you can go to law enforcement academy, and oh, you can become a paramedic in Denver, and now you're in downtown Denver. And I mean, that is like one of the most dense places on the grid. So when did it end? I really think it ended in 2011 when I went public, and I started to call my mother and some of the people at this CART school for autism out, because she was developing consent documents for children with autism to allow them to do medical testing on them. And by then, I had enough memory back, and I had been fighting my way off of addiction and flashbacks and repeat depression and anxiety and in mental institutions and all this shit, and still passing background checks for a level 1 background check, running around in the woods carrying a gun, enforcing laws for the federal government. Like, you should not let me do that. I'm just like, clearly I should not have passed that background check. How did I pass it? Well, because compartmentalization, and you don't talk about the stuff you're not supposed to talk about. And I was good at that. So, but I called her out for trying to get kids to continue to consent to these projects, and did it. And the last time I got harassed by people who were associated with UCI was last year, and the year before. My whistleblower case went nowhere, but I still continue to get phone calls occasionally, and then when I try and do proactive, following all the rules by the numbers, do it by the numbers, I try and get Freedom of Information Act information from UCI, from NIH, and it's just a stonewall. Or they say things, like they're just not going to hear you. The response I got on my whistleblower case was that in the 80s and 90s, parents were allowed to consent for treatment or research procedures on behalf of their children. The Federal Policy for the Protection of Human Subjects, or the Common Rule, was first published in 1991. But with the passage of time, this has changed to generally require child assent and parental permission for participation in research. So she was the one who was trying to get the kids to consent, developing these documents with Jay Gargis of the CART School for Research, which is getting huge amounts of NIH grants. And when you're looking at JFK or RFK Jr. and the Kennedy satanic ruling family stepping into the healthcare position, and they're talking about kids and kids who are developmentally unable to process what a document like this would mean, or what it would mean if they consent to this, because these people are lying pieces of shit. And oh, you think you're just going to give a blood sample? Yeah, and then you're going to be carted all over the world, and you're going to be meeting celebrities, and there's going to be sex trafficking involved, and mind control, and they've opened the door on a very slippery slope, letting Kennedy into this, because these people have nothing. They say do no harm as the false rod of Asclepius, the Hippocratic oath, the hypocritical oath. It means they have nothing of benefit to offer you. So stop looking to them as authorities, because my experience has been, absolutely devastating to try and live each day and find purpose and joy in that. And then they're telling me that these rules were only developed in 1991, when the Nuremberg and all that came out of the Nazi camps, and what happened to the medical patients that those guys were working on, which was the preliminaries of the mind control agenda. it already established that this is a hideous way to behave as a human being, and so just stop. And here they're gonna, keep opening the door to it. So did it end? Yes, but it's really a constant battle to keep this stuff at bay. And it seems to be that while maybe other activists are like, why would she speak out about this? It seems so dangerous. The weird thing is in this spiritual warrior, this law of the quantum field or the unified field consciousness or whatever you want to call it. Marcel Messing would call it the Christos field of intelligence. It's called by lots of things. That the more transparent I can be, the more I can stand in my truth and say, this is what happened. Here are the pieces that are rock solid, and just be honest of when I don't know what this piece is. I don't know why or when. And the more I can do that, and yet also use their own words against them to say, look, this is what they're doing. This is where they're going. The more I will be held in that, Rilke, the tapestry of 1,000 strands held by 1,000 others, and the cloth of peace and liberation for humanity that we have sought for centuries, since the Atlantean times, when the same kind of technology, the same kind of reliance on the mind and mentalism and technology was the fall of that human civilization. We're right on the cusp of all this stuff coming up to be seen again. And so I just really felt like using my voice to explain how the mind control has been done, where they want to go with it, which is total unlimited access to your children for whatever they see fit, and whatever way they can monetize it, needs to be seen for what it is, because I only survived what I survived because of an incredible grace and the opportunity to serve humanity and be here now, right when people needed to hear what the truth really has been, what has been happening at these institutions, what has been happening to children. So did the mind control end? Yes. And every day I fight my way out of the box again. So, and the programs are there, and learning how to defeat them is like an ongoing lived battle on a daily level, on a daily basis.
Well said. So throughout the mind control then, Annalie, what was your lowest moment?
God, there's thousands. There's thousands, Shaun. I mean, I wouldn't I would almost think it was an injustice to how many of me's there are speaking right now to be able to put one in front of the other and say that yours was. I just don't do that. And I don't do that with survivors when we meet either. I would never say to another survivor, well, what I lived was worse than you, because there's no honor in comparing tragedy. There's none. The honor comes as a human soul seeing the beauty and wisdom and courage and heartfelt awareness combined with the power of the mind and understanding the science and understanding that there is a path to healing and that we do have everything. So what my lowest moment was, it's every day and never. It's everything and nothing. It is the void itself, and I just really have to surrender all of it to that, because the level of betrayal, by my mother, by my father, by all of the other family that could have helped and continues not to, the medical and therapists who, frankly, there's no resources for people like me. I mean, there's almost no resources. And yet the numbers of us are, if you want to know how many people have TID, this is straight out of Beauty After Bruises. Think of how many people you know who have red hair. That's how many people are living a life that they have survived extreme trauma and abuse and have complex PTSD or DID. That's the level. In the US alone, there used to be 10 hospitals that could handle an extreme stabilization crisis in someone with DID that was going to be trauma aware enough to be able to work the nuances that are required when you are fracturing like that. Now there's less than 5. And the ability to get help for DID, there's almost no resources. You don't qualify for any kind of disability insurance or monthly payments that will help you provide food or shelter for yourself. Um, Therapy is incredibly expensive. When I saw someone for help in 2011 to get a DID diagnosis for the first time, it was a 4-hour session because I just needed to talk for that long for him to be able to see the switches. It was $600. And we were living on less than $1,200 a month as a family of 4 with 2 adults and 2 kids. And we found $600 because my perpetrator, I tricked her into paying me the money so that I could go see someone so I could find a way through. And I've had to do some stupid, horrible shit in order to figure out how to survive so I can bring this message through. And so I just really want to say that keep searching for help, keep looking. DISSOS.com has wonderful resources for people who are survivors who need really good tangible tools and techniques in bite-sized pieces to work through it. Beauty After Bruises is a great site. And then just do what you need to do to step back from the dog and pony show that's being thrown out there, because they're really trying to confuse everyone with the mainstream media, and it's very triggering. And even on really great sites like yourself and Iconic and Charlie Robinson stuff, I have to step back because you need to maintain your own integrity, and just know that anything that throws you out of your center is going to put you a step back from being able to do the work you want to do in this world to heal for yourself and heal for others. And so just maintain that integrity of being willing to hold your window of tolerance and not step out of that and not allow yourself to be thrown out of center, because people who have DID have so much to offer this world. Those of us who have survived mind control, have skills and information and ways of processing and solving problems that are absolutely what this world needs to heal and move forward. And if we can just get the rug under our feet again and have food on our table so we can think and think clearly for the first time in so long, then we can help you rebuild this world. But we need to be heard first, and we haven't been.
So what was your recovery journey like?
Staccato, it comes and goes, and there's times when I make a lot of progress. And I had my blog in 2011. I came forward and I was working with some other survivors and doing some shows. And then we got targeted. My friend Chris Neal in that group of Clandestine Rage Revealed on WordPress was murdered in his home. His site is still up. You can look. Yeah. Our group was targeted. Duncan and Miranda broke up. She was used in the Stanford project, so she and I had a lot in common, and we met in person at one point.
Was the murder solved of your friend?
Yes. Right? What did they always say? But I mean, he was on his site. You can still see where the people who were targeting him, they said it's going to end in messy spaghetti, and he was found shot with a gunshot wound to the head. So, and then they said it was, but I knew this was going to happen, and I had sent Miranda some notes, and Chris had a note in his wallet, and that was how our group initially ended up finding out. So yeah, I mean, when that happened and then I got targeted, I got picked up again, started to destabilize. People kept, picking at me, throwing stones, so to speak. And then I really just ended up in an ER. And then from there, the cult groups that work in hospitals picked me up, and I was held for at least 3 days. And, this is in a big city hospital in the town I live in. I was electrocuted again. I was drugged. At this time in my life, I was moving on, right? I had a husband, I have two little children. I'm trying to heal, I'm trying to speak out about this, and I get picked up again by a big city university and worked again. And then I was held for 3 weeks after that. They were basically made it clear that if I didn't shut up, take the meds, um, I would never see my kids again. And so my mother was brought back in. I was forced to have a relationship with her again, and my father. I was forced onto meds. And so this is where you learn from nature, right? And what does the mother mallard duck do for months and months of a time? You know, she sits in the reeds and she's a drab gray, and she knows that the world needs her children. And so she's willing to sit in the mud and wait for the time to ripen. And so I really look to nature for some of those lessons. So that part of the healing, maybe that was my worst time. It was 5 years from 2013 to 2018 when the memories all went down, and I was kept on anti-seizure medications, used off-label for controlling my memories, because of course it's all about neural stimulation and how these neural networks work and the firing, right? And having been electrocuted a lot, of course it seems like a seizure. I would be found in the closet, had defecated myself. No one knew how long I had been there. Couldn't speak for hours, after my kids would come home from school and find me and stuff. That's when I started to get it back, so that was pretty dark. And then just slowly realized that the universe was going to put its hand out and freaking yank me out of that, whether in serendipity and weird and, groups of people who cared. They're kind of an odd group, but a lot of my writings are still on Project Avalon forum. I know that that's sort of, give or take the day, can be a great place for community or sticking your head in the toilet. But they've been very nice to host a lot of my writings, and there have been people there who, all those years when I had to suppress everything, they were still saying, hey, look at this woman. They were using my name along with Kathy O'Brien and Kathleen Sullivan, and my name would show up in there. And they're like, this is a real survivor who the story's clear, and there's so much parallel between these stories. And I would periodically just look at that and go, who was I? Who was I trying to be? Who was I trying to speak out? I lost the memories, absolutely didn't remember them. It's interesting, today is 5/5 when we're recording this. The way I started to get it back in 2019 was I kept seeing the number code 5/5 on the dryer would have 55 minutes left, or I would look at the oven and it was 1:55 in the afternoon, and I was like, 55, that sounds really familiar. So I looked up 55 reversal codes, which will put you to some place called the Ascension Glossary. Again, some great information, some toilet there, but the 55 reversal codes, if you look there, it's absolutely spot on. 55 miles an hour is the speed limit. If you look at a lot of the reports on mainstream stuff, they're like 1.55 million was given to such and stuff. They're using this as a code, right? And that was the little, the clockwork was, Miss Mouse was still in there running the maze and trying to find a way out. And so, yeah, I started to dig myself out in 2019. And in 2020, when everything went crazy, I was like, perfect distraction. And I finally filed a police report with the UC Irvine Police. And
so, Annalie, is there anything you'd like to say in conclusion then to the people watching this? Any lessons for other survivors or any tips?
Yes, just understand that everyone out there, you are all survivors. And the way that it's being layered in, and you're being taught to disbelieve your experience and what it's taken to survive the last 40 years on this rock, or however old you are, and so just have that window of tolerance and know that there is a way through, and you have everything you need to heal from whatever it is you're trying to heal inside yourself already. But the liberation comes from within. No one's coming to save us. And we have to find the shovel and start to dig. And there are ways through. And I just encourage you to hold the light of knowing in your heart of hearts that no matter what trauma you've been through, you have a spirit inside you that was never ever touched and they can never touch from any of this. And your access to the infinite, the beautiful, the grace, whatever you want to call it, is indelible and they cannot take that away from you. And if you just hear this from someone who has been into the absolute depths of hell and found her way to have a life and still find joy and still try and help others, you have indelible access to that, and don't give up hope. And know that you have to find that yourself because no one's coming. Yeah.
Well said. You're such a powerful speaker, and some of the people watching this, they may want to support you on your socials or your website or through your book. Do you have links you can send us that we can include with this video?
I stay hidden. I don't have my book published. I don't have a website. I'm not on social media. I live in the Dagobah system. I stay well hidden. If you want to look at my work with the Whistleblower Project, everything is either on Project Avalon forum. Some things you would want to look at there if you look under the genetic manipulation tab. I have some stuff under about the Wellcome Trust and the eugenics and mind control being a collaborative agenda, and it always has been, and where they're taking that now with targeting children. Under the targeted individuals page, there's kind of a fun read. It's a bit long, called Going Off the Reservation, an awakening story of a TI and a targeted individual and cautionary tales. That's a narrative from my blog on when I tried to get away in 2009 and kind of had my awakening with the memories coming back. Under the mind control section, there's some stuff on memory mapping and what they're doing with mRNA and mapping memories and the science of how they're doing this, and as well as my whistleblower case report, including all of the emails intact from the UCI whistleblower office and the parts of the Freedom of Information Act that I was able to share on that, and to just give evidence and testimony that that they won't act on behalf of survivors.
All right. Thank you, Annalie, and thank you, viewers, for watching us. Please put your comments below this video if you're watching it on YouTube. And we salute your bravery, Annalie. Coming on, I can see you've been through an emotional journey today. It must be hard reliving some of this. So we really appreciate you having the courage to spend time with us and inform people and inspire people. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much. I really appreciate the work you're doing, Shaun.